Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua Sheets. I'm your host. Today is Friday, June 6, 2025. And on this Friday, as we do on many other Fridays in which I can arrange the appropriate recording technology, we do live Q&A. You call in, talk about anything that you want, ask any questions you want, bring up any topic of conversation or discussion that you would like. You are in charge of Friday topics, and I am here to serve you in that. If you would like to join me in the future for one of these Friday Q&A shows, you can do that by becoming a patron of the show. Go to patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance, patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance. That will gain access for you to one of these shows. We begin today with Matthew in California. Matthew, welcome to the show. How can I serve you today?
Hey, Joshua, thanks for having me and thanks for the show. I'm in California and I'm kind of one of those radical personal liberals. Your show really helps balance kind of the media that I consume, so I actually really appreciate that.
Cool. My pleasure.
I'm calling today. It's seems kind of straightforward. It's just a question of work-life balance, but coming at it a bit with the entrepreneurship bend. And basically, I'm married. I have a couple of young kids, and ever since about the pandemic, my wife and I we started to make a little more money. That led me down into the financial independence and fire philosophy, and kind of rolling off of that, I do a lot with credit card hacking and bank bonuses, kind of car and home maintenance, all of trying to move us forward financially. Then I got the entrepreneurship bug. But what's kind of happening is as more and more of this piles on top of each other, and then I'm reading about longevity and the importance of friendships and health and exercise. I'm trying to figure out how people balance all of this, keep things moving forward, and kind of don't live with this just crushing amount of stress, trying to balance it all.
Yeah. I don't think anybody does balance it all, meaning that all the stuff that you're describing, there's going to have to be something that gives. And I think that the basic, well, before I give you my answer, have you come up with any solutions or any ideas yourself as to how you can improve the things that you most care about?
Well, I'll hear people will talk about kind of phases of life and recognizing that when your kids are a certain age, it's going to be more difficult and you got to kind of give yourself grace. My kids are a little older now, they're 5 and 8. And so things are shifting a little bit there to be a bit easier. And then I try to, give myself some rules. Like I'm not taking out any new credit cards this quarter just to focus on other aspects of my life. But I think I either need a bigger mindset shift, or I don't know, maybe I need to get back into maybe goal setting or something to kind of just take the stress level down or give me more focus.
How much do you earn?
Together with my wife, $250,000 in high cost of living California.
And about how much do you spend currently in your household?
We're at about 120 with kids in childcare and things like that, since we both work full time.
And you continue to kind of diligently pursue an early retirement financial independence lifestyle. Is that right?
Yeah, our savings rate is about 40%.
Well, there's a lot of things that can be done. And if you have huge amounts of energy and huge amounts of time, then do them all. I've always tried to be one of those people who does them all. I'm interested in everything. I kind of think I can do everything. And I figure, well, if I think I can and I'm interested in everything, then why don't I do that? Problem is that I tend to bite off way more than I can chew. And then I do many things in a mediocre manner, which then causes me not to feel great about myself and how well I'm doing. And then I get frustrated and then kind of go through the cycle. So as I'm getting older, I'm trying to act with more wisdom and finally admit to myself what my mom has been telling me for 20 years, that Joshua, you can't do everything. So I have to choose the things that I do. And obviously that is clearly the logical answer to it and the logical answer to your, to where you are. So let me give you just a couple of mental models that I think are useful, but you already said them. The first and foremost, I think you have to deal straightforwardly with the idea of phases of life. I think of this using my language as time-bound goals versus money-bound goals. So there are some goals that can only be accomplished at a certain point in time, and there are some goals that can be accomplished at any point in time. So a time-bound goal is something that has to happen at a certain time. Usually, the most important of these goals will often relate to family life, to children, and to milestones that children achieve and everything related to that. There are some other goals. For example, you could get a high school degree at any point in time, but it's really pretty convenient to actually get a high school degree at, the normal time. I think that there's a lot of value in kind of being on the normal pathway. Similarly, you could focus on making $100 million with your new startup when you're 22 years old. But it's also perfectly reasonable that maybe at 22 years old, you might be working as a wildland firefighter for a time and then finishing a college degree and doing this thing, doing the other thing, etc. And those are reasonable things to do. So I don't think that, at an earlier stage of life, then that stuff matters. Most of it is laid out, and there's a lot of wisdom in kind of just the standard approach. When you get to family life, there are those goals that are biologically driven. So if you're going to get married and have children, then you need that to happen at a certain point in time. There's a very, very narrow window of fertility. There's a very narrow window of time in which you could have children. And then once those children are here, their lives go through those biological stages very, very quickly. And so you really have to be focusing on that. And so this is why I give the advice that I do when someone says, well, when should I get married? My answer is you should get married not when you have enough money to get married, but rather when you find the person that you should get married to and you're ready to get married from a maturity perspective, from a vision perspective, etc. It's not a matter of how much money you have in the bank. You can have $0, and if you have a job, get married. Similar things with children, right? How much money should I have before I have children? In the fire community, there are people who I've listened to and read who will say, well, when I reach a certain net worth and I want to have, then I'll start having children. And I have to concede the point that sometimes, as a father who works for a living rather than one who is financially independent, sometimes I sit back and think, man, wouldn't that be pretty cool? Wouldn't it be pretty cool if I could be the devoted dad who lives on his pension or lives on his income and just, hangs out with my children and makes cakes all day? Like, that would be super fun. I really love that lifestyle. I enjoy everything about being a homeschool father. I love it. But I also look at that and say, well, I'm glad that I didn't make that decision to wait, because I've worked with and counseled a whole lot of other people who they're waiting on a certain financial milestone and all of a sudden they want to have children and no, can't have them. Too late. Or you can't have the number of children. Just yesterday, I was with someone who we're talking about number of children, and she was saying, we were so sure we had a boy and a girl, and she said, I sent my husband for his vasectomy when we were pregnant with when I was pregnant with my younger child, and now here I am a few years later, and I really, really would like to have more children. And so things like that are a big part of life, and yet they don't fit into a spreadsheet, so we don't often measure them. And then back to the time-bound goals is that once you have children, their life stages are going to proceed according to the common schedule. You'll have a baby for a couple of years, then you'll have a child, then you'll have a tween, right? A child, but someone who's becoming an adolescent, then you'll have an adolescent, and then you'll be launching that adolescent in some way, shape, or form. And with each of those stages, if you want to engage with your children in a straightforward way, then there's your presence, your time, your focus, and all of that is needed. So it's relatively easy for a single man who doesn't want to get married, doesn't have children, to just focus on his money-bound goals. And he'll look at the world and he'll say, well, listen, I have to earn this amount of money. I have to accumulate this amount of money. And once I do that, I'm financially free. And I can go and party here. I can accomplish this thing that I want to do there. I can move to this place whenever I want. There's not really anything pressing about when I want to achieve those goals, except as soon as possible. But if you go down the marriage and children track, then you're kind of weighing these things and you're saying, well, I could be an entrepreneur. I could take on that side job. I could be doing all these things, or I could be taking my children camping this weekend and leaving my cell phone at home. Those two things are not particularly compatible. So I look at it and simply say, something's got to give. And what I'm going to prioritize is always the time-bound goals, the goals that have to happen at a certain time in my life, because the money bound goals can happen in the future. So I'm not financially independent. And I don't know if I will be for a very long time. I would like to be, but I've made the choice to say I'm not going to worry about saving tons of money and, firing and any of that stuff. I'm going to focus on living the life that I want to live now, because if I wake up at 50 years old and I've accomplished the vision that I have for myself in my family, then I'll have some money. Of course I will. And I'll save a good amount of money. That stuff can still work, but I'm not going to sacrifice for money the kinds of life and experience that I want to live now. And I'll wake up at 55 years old, and if I need to work 50, 60 hours a week from 55 to 75, I'm already enthusiastic about that. I think that's amazing. And I'm super excited about that idea, meaning that I'll have a job doing something that I care about. And the idea, after you go through the phases of juggling, children and obligations and family and work and business and things like that, for me, the idea of waking up at 55 years old and just having one job that I work 40 or 50 hours a week leaves me with huge amounts of extra time to do all kinds of other stuff. So I don't see it as a particularly destructive, lifestyle choice. Now, the other thing I should hasten to mention, however, is that some people, when they think about time-bound goals, they think about things like their physical health. So if you know that everyone in your family dropped dead of a heart attack at 50 years old, then you're going to prioritize time differently than if you know that most people in your family lived to 100 years old. And if you know that your vision of, your retirement bucket list is that I want to do these things that require me to be in the absolute prime of my physical condition, then you might have a more of an interest in becoming retired at an early age so that you can go and do these things all around the world than at a later age. I think a lot of those things, having done a lot of travel, I think a lot of those things are over excessive. But anyway, you have to choose that for yourself. So the first model is time-based goals versus money-based goals, and getting clear and recognizing that you're going to have to prioritize one or the other if time is going to move forward, and regardless of whether you're achieving your money-based goals or not. So you have to recognize that you cannot stop the growth of time, the passage of time. You can change the trajectory of money. Then the second model is you have to look and say, what is the most effective thing for me right now, as far as what I can do with the extra time? And opportunity cost is the fundamental key. I'm convinced that it is the understanding opportunity cost and getting good about thinking about what I'm giving up with every decision I take. That is the key metric that is needed for success in the modern world. So if I'm working if you have a good job that's paying you money and there's not a lot of room for advancement, and you're not working on a side project, and you just have a steady job that's kind of a great fit for you, then the world of credit card hacking and mileage hacks and all of that, absolutely, that's a great idea. A good thing to do with some of your time that you're enjoying. It's a good thing to do. On the other hand, if you are capable of doubling your income because you went and took training or education in some space, or you're capable of taking your money and you're capable of buying a business or of starting a business or something like that, and you're goofing off wasting time on credit card hacking that might add $15,000 of luxury travel that you don't really need and you're not that excited about anyway, when in reality what you're giving up is a $500,000 a year business, then that's a bad move. And so I think most of that stuff just comes down to, what is the opportunity that people have. I did a show a while back on credit card hacking, and the basic solution that I came to, or the basic answer I came to, is that for most people, the only people who should really bother much with credit card points and miles are those who just have high natural spend, usually due to some kind of business. Throw it on a mileage card, take your luxury travel, and go on. Because if you actually look at the time involved to really be a good hacker and really get good value from not only earning the points, but actually redeeming the points, it is so time intensive that for most people, that time would be much more productively spent in another sphere. And again, I try to I'm trying to make it clear there's lots of outs. If you don't have those other opportunities, not everybody can go out and make more money. Not everybody can go and start a business. So if you don't have those other opportunities, then mileage hacking or couponing or all the kind of the frugality stuff, all that stuff can be a great use of time. But if you do have other opportunities, as most people do, especially when you live in a place like you live, then that's going to be your most direct pathway. So you have to just do an analysis and say, what would make the biggest difference in my life? What I've tried to say is that for 80% of people, the thing that would make the biggest difference in their life is to on an income side, is not those kind of side quests of becoming great at couponing and earning, sky miles. Rather, or sorry, that's 1990s talk. Earning ultimate rewards or Amex MR membership rewards points. The thing that would make the biggest difference is just get laser focused on your income. And if you're living in a high cost of living place, then that means that there are opportunities for high paying jobs. And you can go from a job making $150,000 a year to a job making $300,000 a year in perhaps 5 or 7 years. And so maybe faster for some people. But I think 5 years to double an income like that when you have an opportunity is a very reasonable expectation for most people of high capacity. So if you look at your budget and you say, man, if I went from $150,000 to $300,000, then I could still save all the money that I'm trying to save for financial independence, but I can also then spend a whole lot more money, which is super fun. It's super fun to spend money with children because there's all kinds of fun things that you can do together with them. And then the final thing I would say is just that I think where this gets really hard is in the FIRE movement. And so what I usually do with, private clients when I'm working with people who are in a situation like you're describing is I try to say, what if we just put pause on, so recognizing you can't do it all, right? You can't live on 60% of your income and do everything else and still fulfill your vision and dreams with your children. So what could we do? Well, usually what I find is the most direct pathway is if you've stacked up a bunch of money already from some years of living on a small amount, do a calculation to see where you're likely to be in 20, 30, or 40 years if you don't save any more money. And for most people, all you need is like 5 good years of stacking aside money under a hardcore extreme savings approach, and you will be very far ahead of your peers. Then pause the extreme savings and recognize that pause the extreme savings and recognize that for most people, once you've had a few years of extreme savings, if you can insert time back into things, I'm stammering on my words because I'm realizing I should pause and ask more questions. But the basic concept is once you have some savings, just put pause on the extremeness of savings and say, I've got enough money there. So how can I find a job or a business that gives me the life I want to live and no longer put the pressure on myself to save half my income? Just say, I'm not going to save any money, but I'm going to live how I want to live and have the flexibility that I want to live. Because there are people who are working a stressful job that they don't really like, that yet they saved enough money that if they stop saving today, in 20 years, they'll be really rich. And my advice to those people is, go become a teacher, right? Go get a job teaching at a local government school, have your summers off, do all your travel stuff with your children. You have summers off, you have Christmas break off, you have a super interesting, rewarding job, as long as you can deal with the challenges of being a teacher. And you don't need the money anymore, so you can give up the higher paying job for the job that gives you the flexibility. Now you take out teacher from this and you substitute anything that you're interested in. And once you get 5 years of extreme savings into your bank accounts, then run the calculations and see, can I just go ahead and moderate this? Is there any actual benefit to me scrimping and saving when I've got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, so that when I've got a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, I finally reach financial independence right at that time, but I missed all the years in between? My answer is no. So, as you get into that phase that you're in right now, pull back on the savings, build a lifestyle with a job that works for you. If that means making more money because there's something that you're really interested in, cool, go for that and drop credit card hacking. If it means, no, I've got this job that I'm really good at and it doesn't cost me too much time, but there's not a lot of room for advancement, then stick with it and do credit card hacking so you can do luxury travel and just chill out for about 10 years. And then after 10 years, your assets will have grown, your children will have grown, they'll be much more independent and be launching. And then that's when you can go hardcore into a new phase of life. To me, that makes much more sense than trying to do it all at once.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Those are some good points to think of. Right now, I am a professor, and my wife is in the government, so we're not perfectly placed for big advancements in our salaries. Although part of me is feeling like I'm not really chasing the financial success through this credit card hacking or the entrepreneurship piece, but it just seems like I'm looking for this sense of accomplishment, and I can't even tell if it's coming from within me or just all the media that I consume, that I need to be able to build and create something successful, something outside of the success or satisfaction I get from work or family. And it's that piece, this entrepreneur piece, that it's been dragging for a few years, and I think, cutting off too much focus on fire or other side hustle things that are shiny and fun. But I think I do need to double down on it. I'm not sure if you have any strategies maybe that you've used to kind of help pull along that entrepreneurship bug through,
You need to
some
double
of your
down on
busier
you need to double
phases.
down on pursuing entrepreneurship, or you need to double down on what?
Yeah, double down on maintaining my focus on, picking one thing, let's say. And like you said, I don't need to keep plowing the same amount into our retirement funds. I have it kind of mapped out for a few years. And it's exactly what you said. As soon as my kids are too old to want to be spending time with me, that's when I'm going to reach fire.
Yep.
So it's not really aligned to meet my life goals anyways. So I think pulling back on kind of chasing early retirement would be a step in the right direction. But I do want to hang on to this goal of creating something. I'm in science education, basically, is what this business I'm building is in. And I've just been working on it since the pandemic and never really getting it to the launch stage. So I don't know if you have any tips specific to growing and starting a small business.
Why do you
how
want
you
to start a small business? Why do you care about entrepreneurship?
I think I've had a bunch of jobs, and pretty interesting jobs. Like I was a zoo director and I'm a professor, and they're fun-ish, but I never really got the full satisfaction out of them for some reason. And I never considered entrepreneurship until a few years ago when I had enough money to kind of bankroll it a bit. And I can't shake the feeling that like this is something that I'm meant to do, or it's going to unlock some satisfaction or feeling of success that working for other people has never generated.
Well, you're going to go in the direction that you feel pulled to go, right? You're going to go in the direction of what you feel like, this is what I want to do. And so if that's entrepreneurship, then you'll go in that direction. I would be careful to try to understand as much as possible why you want to go in that direction. From my perspective as an entrepreneur, you've got my dream job, right? To be a professor, to me, is like, that's the thing that I would love to do. It'd be super interesting to me, super rewarding, all that stuff. I don't have a doctorate. I don't have any pathway into any particular specialty other than financial planning, and I don't want to be a professor of financial planning. So I'll probably, I never say never, because obviously I'm aware that if I set out a plan and wanted to do that, and then 5 years or 10 years, I could be a professor. But that your job, assuming you're a university professor, your job has all of the characteristics that for me are kind of a dream because of the environment. But the downside of the job is you don't make a ton of money. You make a good living, an honest living that is significant, but you don't make a ton of money. And so you kind of have to give
Hmm.
up on making all the money from a job when you're in that scenario, simply because it's not really doable. But everything else about it is super, super rewarding. Now, as an entrepreneur, let's imagine your business, and you haven't scoped it out, but let's say that your business is super successful and you're sitting, 2 years from now, you're sitting in your spare bedroom in your pajamas, and you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars per year at your science education business, working alone, no hassle of employees, no hassle of anything. Well, I've done that. And what I have found is that it's really lonely. It's really lonely, and it's hard to be motivated by money when you're in that kind of environment. So, I'll probably always be an entrepreneur, I guess, because that's kind of the life path that I've gone down. Although I've thought about jobs, but what I observe is that there are benefits on both sides. And so if you really care about the education piece of it, and like this is something that needs to exist because kids are not learning anything about science that's effective, and I've got this brand new thing, then you're just going to do it one way or the other. If it's really about the money, then what do you need the money for? You need to have some kind of vision that is so big that you need more money than what you're living on right now. And if it's about the lifestyle, then make sure that you've carefully assessed the ideal lifestyle that's associated with it. And that's why I'm trying to say, like, being a solopreneur working in your spare bedroom, you're not going to get anywhere near the kind of relationship stimulation and the camaraderie and the sense of shared purpose and the fun of interacting with eager young students who are interested in what you have to share. Of course, I'm painting the rosiest picture possible of it all, obviously, but you miss out on some of those things in favor of staring at a computer screen, interacting with everyone virtually, all of kind of the downsides. So if you understand why you're trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, that will be helpful. If you're trying to do it for the money, I'm basically saying you don't need the money. And you probably would enjoy more the stability and the simplicity if you just dropped the entrepreneurship piece, and you just keep your job. Your wife keeps her job. You have retirement accounts. She's got a pension account, and you enjoy hanging out with your children. Come back to it in 10 years and see if you still have that entrepreneur's bug. If you're just after it for the money, I think that's not a good motivation in this regard, because this is not a phase of life in which you're being limited by the amount of money that you earn. Rather, the time to be with your children is probably going to be something more important for the next decade. If you're in it for the sense of meaning and purpose and contribution, then you're going to do it regardless of the money. And so that just means you got to drop off other things of that are monetary, like your credit card hacking, so you can actually recognize what's the point of having tons of points and doing some luxury trips when what I'm giving up is producing this science education piece that I think really needs to exist in the world. And I'll stop there. But you are right; you can't do it all. So the only pathway I know is to lay out what you are trying to accomplish. Try to get really clear on your why, of why do I care about this, and then ask yourself or an external person, if I were coaching me and this was my why, then do I really need to be? Is this really the thing that I need at this phase of life?
Hmm. Right. All right. Thanks, Joshua. I really appreciate all that.
It's a start. Keep in touch. I want to hear from you, and thank you for being one of my liberal listeners. I love you.
This sounds good. Okay.
Oh, fun. Ben in Pennsylvania, welcome to the show. How can I serve you today, sir?
Hey, Joshua, I was wondering what investment ideas are exciting to you lately? I know you've got a lot of kids, another one on the way, so it's hard to, well, maybe it's not hard to think about outside of the family what you can invest in, what you can spend money on. I'm in the opposite situation. I have zero wife and zero kids, so a little bit more funds. I've I'm doing a max in 401k and mega backdoor Roth and regular Roth, but there's a little extra. And I'm wondering, what are you seeing out there? What's getting you excited? And um, both domestically, we're talking US, and possibly internationally. What are you seeing out there that's interesting to you?
I appreciate the softball layup question. It's very kind of you. I'm probably the worst personal finance, like finance podcast host of all time, in the sense that I have so little interest in financial investments that don't have a purpose behind them. So that I can't, that I just, most of the kind of the common answers that most podcast hosts would give to such a nice layup question bore me to tears. I have no interest in stocks. I have no interest in trading. I have no interest in cool new strategies. I had a brief and passing interest for a number of years when I was younger, but at this point, like the idea of investing of being interesting for its own sake is uninteresting to me. I'm not a Warren Buffett. I'm not interested in that aspect of it. I'm interested in the impact of investing. So what I'm obsessed with personally is basically the betterment of the human race. And I don't mean that to sound grandiose. I genuinely care about that. I care enormously about all like social and cultural issues and people. So I am obsessed with how can we invest into people? How can we invest into communities? How can we invest into families? How can we invest into children? And I see money as a necessary component to a lot of those things. And so I'm interested in money because money funds the kinds of actual investments that I care about. And it's just necessary you can't accomplish some of the most important things without money. I don't see money as in any way evil or undesirable. It's just that I'm more interested in what can be done with the money than I am in the money. And so the technical tools and the technical way of getting there to me is not particularly interesting. It's much more a matter of like what can be done with it. So since you asked me this lovely, easy layup question, what I'm interested in is how can we invest into people effectively in our current circumstances. So ever since, last week I released that podcast, that roundtable discussion that we had with Greg Treat. So I met Greg for the first time at family camp. I invited him as a speaker based upon a recommendation from a friend. I hadn't spent any time with him, but we hit it off at family camp, and we have been having a robust discussion, those of us who attended, on basically these societal questions. When I look around when I look around at society, I'm living in a significantly broken society, a broken community. I'm living in an era in which when I look around and see what's out there, it seems to me that there are a lot of people not thriving. And I believe that we have a responsibility to build communities and build a society where more people can thrive. And so I'm interested in what are the things that cause that to happen, and what are the investments that we could make that will cause that to thrive. I'm also interested in all the sociological effects, even globally. So, for example, I'm interested in social causes all around the world. Where can we spend money and get huge rates of return and philanthropic efforts to eradicate disease, to eradicate social ills, and increase the health of societies all around the world? And then within communities, I'm interested in how can we radically transform people to create more high capacity, effective people. And that is going to come down to elements of community, elements of basically causing high capacity people to look around them and think about what can help their local space. And so the discussion, even over the past couple of weeks, one of the things that we've been talking about in that little group that I mentioned that has been very inspiring to me is just simply recognizing how much more wealth there is available for people who see a use for it. For the last week, I've been obsessed with this question of how big your vision is. So it's very common in financial planning that I will be I might wind up talking to somebody who is a successful, wealthy businessman, successful, wealthy professional, somebody who has built something really neat and is at the range of, well, somewhere between usually $5 to $10 million. Okay. $5 to $10 million is a sufficient amount of wealth to support all of the lifestyle ambitions of normal people. When I say normal, what I mean is you can be financially independent. You can have a comfortable, secure home in an upper middle class neighborhood that has all that you need to live in. You can have all of the high quality food that you and your family can eat. You have zero concerns about running out of money. You can have a new, comfortable, safe, modern vehicle, and you can have a handful of toys. Might be a motorcycle, a boat, an airplane. You can have any toys that you want. You can take any trips that you want, things like that. So $5 to $10 million is enough to fund that lifestyle pretty easily. And so when I look at people in that situation, the common thing is, well, I'm 53 years old. I'm kind of tired of this work, this kind of a hassle to run this business. I got to go to work every day. I got to supervise these people. And so why not just go ahead and sell out and retire? After all, I've got enough money for me and those around me. I look at that. So my biggest interest right now is, but what could that 50-year-old or what could that 60-year-old do if, he or she would put in another 20 or 30 years? And so in order to change that, you would have to demonstrate why someone in that position would want to go from $5 or $10 million to $40 or $50 million. And what would be the purpose of that? What could be done? And yet, that's what I think many of those people should do. When you're skilled with money and you have a business or you have investments that you're interested in, then we should be working on that. And I didn't used to think this way, but over the last couple of years, I've just come to realize that there's a list of things that we could be very effectively investing money in. I've got my own pet list, what I would like to put $50 million into, but there's lots of other of people working on this problem. You've got the effective altruism movement that has been interesting to watch over the last decade, and some of what the ideas that they have been working on. There's all kinds of aspects to this where we can make a huge difference significantly. And I felt super embarrassed, just in conclusion. I felt super embarrassed when I've been trying to figure out how to formulate some of these ideas comprehensively, because I felt bad a couple months ago on a podcast where I was talking about Warren Buffett and was saying, here was what Warren Buffett did wrong with giving his money away. And it's easy to jump on Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and say, oh, they're doing all this stuff that is wasteful. I don't actually believe that, nor do I think that. And I regretted saying that. I regretted that kind of response that I had, even though it was genuine, because I'm trying to learn about this. And what I've realized is that I think a lot of people, some people are super interested in the technical side of making money and kind of the standard approach to the investment. Here's the thing that I really want to put my money into. But I think there's a whole wide swath of us out there who don't have any interest in the technical side, but we have an interest in the meaning side of, here's what I could put that money towards, and here's how it would improve my community. Here's how it would improve my town, my family, my people, my society, my country, my world. And that's where I'm drawn at this point in time, because we have high return investments that we can make into people. And I think that's just so much more interesting than any particular prediction for the financial capital. I also observe that it's hard to do. And so I consider the world of investing, as far as what to invest in, pretty well answered, meaning that for anything that interests you, you can go and you can find 10 experts on it who will tell you exactly what meme coin to put your fortune into to 10x it. But I'm interested in how incompetent we are as a human species of actually effectively building wealth and transferring it among people. So that's what I'm into right now.
Yeah. Okay. And the story, maybe not from the round table, but was it the podcast before where you talked about a young man that you took to a conference with you, that you paid for lodging and flights and the VIP ticket? And I love that. And I've done some, call it investing, but helping people in my own community. But the funds that you have to have spent on that trip those funds must have come from some investment or just work.
Yeah.
Or you doing this work,
Yep.
putting your classes out, or what investments that I'm thinking to do that will reap rewards in the future that I can help those locally or help a cause that I like, something like that.
Yeah. Of course they do. Yeah, absolutely. Of course they do. So I tend to think, for me, due to this connection, and I've been working on this for years, but I desire to invest into business. I think everyone should have some paper investments. I have very little interest in things like real estate myself. I don't enjoy owning real estate. I don't enjoy working on it. It's just not my interest. I see for other people it can be a really great solution, but it's very much not my interest. I'm interested in businesses because businesses are where you have the biggest impact to invest, to affect people, and businesses well run also give you the highest return on investment. So that's what I'm interested in doing with my money. And that's what I'm doing with my money, is working on trying to figure out how do I do that. Problem is there's no manual on it, and it's very difficult to find people who talk about this because most of them are out in the real world and they're not online. So a lot of times they're not sharing stuff online. So that's what I'm working on. That's why, I had Tim Yarbrough come and speak at the conference. Tim it was so inspiring, right? He's an investor in, I think it's not exaggeration to say hundreds, but certainly many, many businesses. And yet he's done it through the lens of not exclusively profit, but rather in terms of how can I make my town better? So he's a financier of people. He's a financier of people who are starting a business so that they can create a useful service within their town, and so that they can support their families, and so that they can improve the local community. And so Tim is working with them as a mentor, as an advisor, and as a financier, and then earning return on his assets from that. And then he's trying to duplicate that process out. And so there are businessmen and women doing that in your town and in my town all over, but they're usually much more hidden away. And so that's where my interest is how can we do that? And I'm happy to take a lower rate of return if I can see that my neighbor is winning and I've been able to finance and I've been able to fund his business growth. I'm happy to take a slightly lower return to also get, on top of a good financial return, to also get those other benefits.
Okay. All right. Thanks for helping me think through.
I mean, again, softball layup question, but the answer is, but I should have just said, I don't know, because this is what I've been working on for years, because I see the need for it, but I don't know how to articulate it or teach about it. So as I figure it out, I'll try to share with that story along the way, and we'll try to figure out how to do it. And it starts with $1,000, moves on to 100, and moves on to millions. But we got to start with $1,000 and learn the lessons, and then share them with one another to figure it out. So thank you for calling in. Appreciate the question. We go now to Ria in Washington. Welcome to the show. How can I serve you today?
Hi, Joshua. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good. Go ahead. Yep, sounds good.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a library question. So I've heard you talk to folks about putting together community libraries and school libraries, and I might have just missed the home library talk at some point during your show, but my wife and I just have a real big book mess going on. And I'm wondering if you got any hot tips for how to organize your home library in any effective way.
Yeah. I use an app called BookBuddy. BookBuddy is really useful. Right. So it's an app. I use it on iPhone. I don't know if it's on Android as well. But what BookBuddy allows me to do is that my wife and I share the app. We share the files. And so we went through the work of categorizing every book in our library in the app. For the majority of especially modern books, it's easy because all you got to do when you go to you go to the bookstore and buy a stack of books that are modern is you just pull out the camera, stack the books up, shoot the barcode, shoot, and boom, you've got them all in there, up to date. If you've got a lot of old books, you can categorize them manually. And it's a pretty cool app because you can put in all the information. So if it's a modern book, it'll draw in the publisher and the book blurb and all of that into the different fields. We do have a lot of old books that don't have barcodes, and also some that don't even have ISBN numbers and things like that. So you can just manually add in the title, the author, and then shoot a little picture of the cover of it. So that's the first thing I would say, because what would happen is I would go out buying books and I forget all the books that we own, and I come back with all these doubles, and my wife's like, well, these are good books, but we already have copies of them. So now I have everything in an app, and I check the app before I buy books so that we can specifically own that. And so that would be the first suggestion that I would make. If you're dealing with, so I also have done things in the past. So before I started traveling a number of years ago, I actually scanned my entire library. So my library was my books, and I did destructive scanning at that point in time, which was I cut off all the binders of the bindings of all the books. I ran them all through a duplex scanner, and I created a full library of all of my books at that time, and have all those now with digital access, which was kind of a mixed bag of results. What I like about that, what's really nice, especially doing what I do for a living, is I have them all organized in a software program called Calibre, Calibre, which is one of the leading kind of simple open source programs for library management of ebooks. So what I like about that is that wherever I go, I can access all of my books that from many years of, well, from a number of years, because I've gotten rid of my library a few times. So I like that. It's pretty cool to be able to see that. So I can go back and I can see all my own marginalia from all my past books, and it's all there. And then I can also use that to organize all of my digital books and digital files and things that I accumulated over a long time. What I have found, however, is that, after years of having that digital library, it's a little annoying. I kind of wish I had the books back over again, because while it's convenient to have them available from my computer and my phone, I forget what's in there, and I have some of them tagged and categorized so I can go look up different subjects, but I just wish I had a section on the shelf of those books so I could remember, oh, here's what it was. I had an experience where many years ago, when I started the podcast, I had bought this book of, I won't say the title, doesn't matter, but I had bought this book, and it had a bunch of financial content in it. And I thought, this book is perfect for me for ideas for podcasts. And I was like, this thing is a gold mine. All I got to do is if I'm out of ideas for a podcast, I can just take every chapter title and boom, here's my idea for a podcast. Because I pretty much agree with everything this author says. So this is going to be perfect. What a great book this is. So then sometime later, I scanned the book and put it away, and I lost it for the last 7 years. I could not find the book. I would search and I would search and I would search, and I tried every keyword I could think of. I could not come up with the book at all until last month. I finally came up with an idea, and I remembered something about the author. Then I fed that in as an AI prompt and was able with that to finally find the book in my library. So that never would have happened if it had been a physical library, because yes, you have to look through all the books, but you could find it. But I couldn't look through. I think I have 3,000 or 4,000 books in my digital library now. And I wasn't going to sit there and look through 3,000 or 4,000 entries on a screen just to find this one book. Whereas if it had been a physical book, I would have been able to do that. So that I recommend. But I would say most of my efforts right now are based around building a library for my children. So a lot of my books that I deal with now are digital, but I really believe that it's better to read physical books, both for me and for others. So I work hard and spend a lot of money to buy all the physical books for my children for their school. And since we use a super hard, pretty intense literary curriculum, I'm convinced that that's the best way that most of education should be literature based for the highest quality education. Then that basically means I'm mostly buying books from literature lists and whatnot for my children. So that's most of my library activity and what I do personally.
Okay. Really quick, do you just type in literature lists? Do you find them through your reading?
Well,
looking for, going through the Charlotte Mason curriculum, you find a list. Going through something here, you find a list, and then you just acquire those or decide what you want out of it?
it depends. So specifically, we use as our spine, as would be said in homeschool circles, I use Ambleside Online as the basic outline of our educational endeavors. Ambleside Online is a free, open source Charlotte Mason curriculum that's put together by a group of super passionate homeschool moms that are super passionate about homeschooling. They're super passionate about Charlotte Mason, and they put together the Ambleside Online curriculum. And it's a 12-year curriculum. It's there, and it's very, 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 very literature-based and very, I think, excellent. There are a number of other really good, Charlotte Mason style curricula out there. I really admire Sonia Schaefer and Simply Charlotte Mason and what she does. I bought a bunch of her books and her DVDs and things like that. I think she does a great job. And there's lots of other ones out there. There's Mater Amabilis. There's lots of various things. But every time I look at Ambleside Online, that's the gold standard that I measure everything against. The Ambleside Online curriculum has a lot of literature. And so I just buy all the books for both the core subjects and all of the additional free reading from there as my starting point. Then, in addition to that, I do have a bit of a hobby of collecting book lists. So whenever I see one, I collect it. It could be the 1,000 good books. The Mensa reading list is out there. I have the book about books that teach character. I forget the author's name, but books that teach character. There's lots of, especially in English, we have lots of books that are books of books to buy. And so you can go through there and read and get that. So the challenge is, of course, that there's no way to consume all the books. So we've got to constrain it. And so any book that I buy means something else has to go away. Like there's no possibility that my children could read all the books that that I'd like them to read. And so I've got to get rid of something. And I think that the Ambleside Online curriculum is so good as far as very carefully thought out, tested over many years, open forum of discussion, there. I just think it's really, really good. So that's where I start with. But I do also then purchase other books. And then the last thing is I try to do a lot of the reading in other languages. And so that's where a lot of the pop culture books come in. So my interests and my thoughts on education, it tends to be fairly highbrow, not because I am trying to be elite, just because I think we have in the English language the world's greatest repository of literature, only getting better. And we should continue that. And I think that having a high-level, highbrow education is a worthy endeavor. So I'm not interested in a lot of kind of normal pop culture stuff in English. However, all of the disadvantages, and I think there's a place for it. Like, especially if you're trying to get someone to learn to read, go with, whatever the current version of, I don't even know what, Harry Potter or Babysitter's Club or whatever, like the current version, just go with whatever a child will read until he or she gets hooked on reading, and then steady by steady work your way up towards high level, complicated literature. But the flip side is that in all of the downsides of pop culture literature in English wind up being a huge benefit in a foreign language. So if Harry Potter is annoyingly simplistic and kind of poorly written in English, that exact same thing in English becomes a huge benefit in Spanish, because it's way easier to read Harry Potter in Spanish than it is to go and read some, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? You need pop culture books. And so that's where I bring in all the pop culture stuff. So if I can find in a foreign language a book or a series or something super simple that my children are into, then I try to use that kind of addictive nature and say, well, let me go ahead and buy another 10 of these. And I don't mind if they're children's literature or kind of poppy stuff, as long as it's in a foreign language that they're learning. So that's my other strategy.
Yeah, the book mess has gotten very. I appreciate all what you said. I love it, but the book mess has gotten really overwhelming. And we've only got, my kids are half as old as yours. So
more bookshelves, more
I hear
bookshelves.
you. You got to get rid of some stuff. I try and donate to the book fair, but it's a nightmare.
I just think choose the quality stuff, and I think you're going to wind up. Let me see how many. I couldn't do it in linear feet, but you're going to wind up with you need a bunch of bookcases if you're going to do it, and so. I would just say reserve if you're limited on bookshelf space, like we all are, then reserve your bookshelves for the core texts that you really want in paper because of the things that are going to be learned from that. Limit it to the out of print stuff, like the old stuff or the foreign language stuff or things that you can't get easily on Kindle. And then for stuff that you're just going to consume a bunch of, just put that on Kindle and use them both. And I think that having kind of a multi-pronged strategy like that works really well. So, but we all wish I'm out of bookshelf space, and so I have to convince my wife to allow a little more space in my house too. All right, good question. Thank you very much. We go to Jordan in New York. Jordan, you're up. Welcome to the show. How can I serve you today?
Hey, how's it going?
Very well, sir.
Okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, no.
Sounds good.
Yeah, okay, great. So, I was at family camp, and I just have this kind of thought bouncing around in my head since then. There was one presentation, I'm not sure it's necessary to say specifically what it was, but you'll probably know. And, it really emphasized sort of cross-border freedom, living in different countries, having multiple passports, things like that. And anyway, afterwards, I talked to this speaker in a group of 10 or 15 of us and asked, do you teach your children to conceive of themselves as members of a nation state? And they said, no, not really. That sounds like patriotism, and patriotism is kind of hokey pokey to me, and I don't really want my kids to adopt, those ideas. So I was wondering the same about you. Do you work to sort of inculcate in your children the idea that they're members of a presumably American nation state or some other nation state, or is that also not something that you prioritize or maybe even see as a negative?
Can we not have this conversation in public where I'm accountable to thousands of people instead? Have a nice one-on-one where I can share my true thoughts and feelings without being exposed to the world?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're under no obligation to answer in this forum or anything.
No, I made a promise to myself that the day I stop being honest is the day I end my podcast. So no, I'm. It's a point of conflict for me personally because of the experiences that I've had over the years. So I find myself still kind of uncertain about my answer to that question for a number of things. So I can't give you like here's where I am. I'll just share just a few of the experiences that I've had and you can consider. So first and foremost, I am deeply grateful, right, to be a natural born American, and I identify deeply with the American culture. As I have thought a lot about it in traveling and things like that, I realized no, I identify deeply. I resonate with what it means to be an American. I will always be an American. That's at the core of my identity. And I really like a lot of things about the American culture. And it's very important to me that my children absorb many things from the American culture. And because I just think so fundamentally that so much of it I really love. I'm very proud of the United States of America. I'm proud to be an American, and I really, really appreciate that. So that is one side of it. On the other side of it, in my lifetime, I have watched my country fundamentally transformed, and so many of the values that I hold of what it means to be an American absolutely like just destroyed. And so, when I left the United States, and thinking that, in order for me to keep my conscience, I'm probably going to wind up having to renounce my U.S. citizenship. That was a super painful thing. And I was super angry with the country. And it's just utterly embarrassing. It's been so embarrassing to be an American on so many levels. It's just utterly embarrassing. And so it's how do you deal with that, right? If you're actually honest about the world or exposed, and I don't want to be critical of anybody, because some people live in kind of a groupthink like-minded bubble, and that's probably where I wish I was, because I'd probably be happier if I just was a rabid Trump fan or a rabid anti-Trumper, or if I was just a rabid, whatever. But whatever reason, for better, for worse, I'm not that way. I look at it an issue at a time, which means that I always have these conflicting kind of feelings. So when I left the United States, I'm like, these guys are going to wind up. These guys are destroying the country that I love, and I don't see any point in trying to be involved in revolution or insurrection or anything like that. So I'm not going to sit around and stack up my ammo. I need to keep my conscience. But if there's something I could do that was positive, then of course that's fine. And in saying that, of course, the question is, well, am I a coward? I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Am I a coward? Am I a coward for leaving the United States? Isn't it better to stay and fight instead of leaving? And my answer is that it may be, and yet the person who stays and fights, there's a big difference between somebody who could leave and then who chooses to stay and fight, as compared to somebody who can't leave and then is forced to stay and fight. That the person who could leave and is choosing to stay and fight, we know that person is acting on principle. The other person, we're not sure. So I just looked at it and said, well, having the option to leave is not a bad thing, and I can choose later. And it's interesting. You also mentioned family camp. Obviously, it was an important thing. I was talking to one of the attendees who I've known for a while, who was from Ukraine, and we were specifically sitting at the campfire talking about that, because he's a Ukrainian citizen, dual citizen, Ukrainian American, living in the United States now, and we talked about this. Right? Is he a coward for not going back to Ukraine and fighting? Am I a coward for not, quote unquote, fighting for my country, whatever that means in that sense? And I'm not going to say yes or no, but certainly some could easily accuse me of that, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Is that the right pathway? But the problem for me with the concept of the nation state is that I simply I feel an affinity to the principles, that many of the principles that were foundational to the United States of America, but I don't know how I could have an affinity for a nation state as large as the United States of America. That's 350 million people. And some of those people, I am much closer. And so then you get to, so hold on a second. So you get to contrast with other people from other things. The nation state is a very modern invention. It is very historically new, and I'm not sure it's going to be around in 100 years. I thought it was interesting in watching the election of the newest Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, and somebody was talking about how the Pope was, I forget the exact thing, but basically, it's the first U.S. American Pope. And so it's the first American Pope. People are looking at it and saying, well, we finally have an American Pope. You do realize that the Roman Catholic Church predates the nation state by, like, I don't know, 1600, 1700, 1800 years for much of the world. And will be continuing long after the collapse of the entire concept of the nation state all around the world. So the nation state itself is a figment of modern culture. And so, I talked about embarrassment. So for the last years, I don't know, 5 years or something like that, all around the world, at every single U.S. embassy, and I've darkened the doors of many embassy, they were flying an American flag and a pervert flag right underneath it. And I have to go into that embassy, and that is the thing that is associating with my name. The gall that does for me, of knowing that we are going to celebrate and promote perversion around the world, and that the flag of the nation state is associated with spreading perversion in the world, is an enormous conflict. So how do I profess some sense of allegiance and affirmation of a group of people that are destroying families, that are destroying children, that are destroying people and destroying their lives and literally sending so many people to their death because of a perverted ideology. What do we do with that? How do I reconcile that? So I guess my point is that if you actually look at this stuff straightforwardly, how do you think about concepts like patriotism? Patriotism, to me, and patriotism and nationalism are distinct. I would say they're distinct. I do not resonate at all with nationalism. Like the current wave of populist nationalism, I see as utterly destructive to the country that I love. And so that is so frustrating. But I do feel a sense of patriotism towards my neighbors and towards the people who I am like. But you can't include that. That has to mean that you stand for something, and you have to be able to affirm these are the things that I stand for. So I guess at this point in time, I'm much more optimistic and appreciative of the United States today than I was 5 years ago. After 5 difficult years of my life, kind of thinking about all that stuff, I really, really deeply appreciate the United States, and I expect to be, full-time in the United States very soon, just because I so deeply appreciate it. I want my children to grow up as Americans with the American culture, but to ask that I kind of celebrate that stuff with a sense of patriotism, to ask that I celebrate even just the I'm going to get myself in trouble. The current affairs, it's such a chaotic mess that I just wish for statesmen. I wish for wise leaders, not maybe it never was better. Maybe that's just a massive golden era fallacy, but I'm deeply frustrated by the current state of affairs, and yet I see almost no resolution to it. At its core, I question, if I could be elected emperor of the world and wave my hands, I would dramatically dial back popular democracy in the United States and move deeply in the favor of a more Republican sense of government. Now, I haven't yet finished my understanding of how the country could be changed, but if I could end, I would like to see direct election of U.S. senators end. I would like to see the direct election of a U.S. president end, and go back to a state-based level, because to me that is the size of that where we could be kind of engaged. I'd much more like to fly a Florida flag in my yard than I would like to fly an American flag. Now, obviously, the two are deeply related, but the sense of patriotism that I think we can and should feel is to our neighbors and to the people that we know, and the concept of a 350 million person nation state, and the fact that the people in that are so diverse that I don't think if you asked 100 senators, I won't even make you quiz the House of Representatives, but if you asked 100 senators of what does our nation stand for, we are so fundamentally confused at the moment that there's no way to know. There's no way to answer that. There's just no way to know. So I'm not anti-American. I'm actually very pro-American and very optimistic about these things, and I'm proud of my country, but I am deeply frustrated with it, and it's very hard to celebrate many aspects of it. So what I try to focus on is celebrating the people, and I feel a deep sense of resonance and connection with the American people because they think like I think. And that was what I realized during COVID, is that for all of the annoyances that people had, I'm like, well, there's probably not 350 million people in the United States that think like I think, but there's 100 million people, and I'm never going to find that kind of community anywhere else when I have access to 100 million people. And so it's not necessary that everybody agree with me or that I agree with everyone else. So there's my extemporaneous, bumbled up answer to say it's a very painful question for me because I want to experience those feelings, but when the country that you love is so profoundly in error of that, and especially in the Trump era, it's been profoundly painful to me to try to figure out how do you even think about any of this stuff. So there's my answer. Is I'm not opposed. I don't think libertarianism has any future, and I think patriotism is a good thing. But patriotism should be pretty critical of things, and that sense of appreciating people who are critical in our current popular moment. If you say anything that is outside of the party line, we've just become a people who, instead of valuing dissent, we become a people who suppress dissent, and I find that very troubling.
I appreciate your answer, and a very fulsome one at that. Anyways, thank you. And yeah, I'll continue thinking about it. When one of the first questions I asked you at family camp for the first time was about democracy for some of these same reasons. Always thinking about these things, and we had a good conversation then about.
Has my answer changed at all? Is it
the benefits?
Has it been consistent?
I think it's different, but at that time you expressed somewhat skeptical views about democracy, and we talked about it in the context of Christianity and whether Christianity had any opinion on democracy, which I think at that time you expressed that you didn't think it did. It was sort of agnostic one way or the other on democracy, which I would agree with.
Yeah,
and I was not at that time. Yeah, I wasn't thinking as much on these questions of sort of being a member of a nation state, raising children with that conception or not. And one big thought I have, again, from family camp, and some of the things you just said is sort of like a lot of this freedom of movement and freedom of expression throughout the world is just essentially the byproduct of a Pax Americana.
Right.
So what I often feel like I see is people, and it really disheartens me when I see Americans, but I see many non-Americans do this, they'll be extremely critical of America. And then whether they acknowledge it or not, they hold their reserves in dollars, they transact in dollar, they basically have good contract law in many countries because we have set a good example for the world and hold people somewhat accountable. We have embassies everywhere so that you can travel more safely, so that you can spend time with your family in other countries. So, and I take your point about, seeing symbols that you find repugnant or disagree with, but I see them as and being members of what I think, of course, is the best nation state that we've ever had. Though I think all of your points are valid to more and less degrees, and some of them I think are extremely valid and very frustrating, of course.
Yeah. You broke up right when.
But anyway, I appreciate your answer, and I'll let you go.
You broke off right when you were just saying you see them as valid. I'll intuit what you're saying and just say, on the Pax Americana thing, I was so sobered a number of years ago when I read Peter Zeihan's book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. And that book, I think, was so sobering to me because what I realized is I've lived my entire life in this golden era that a particular geopolitical analyst then says has never before happened and will not happen for a very long time. And when I was younger, that's where we get into questions of empire and is the American empire a net good or a net bad? And man, what a thorny question to look through. But on the whole, I think I'm going to put my vote on the side of very much of a net good. That Pax Americana has been a net good. And that's one of the things that I find so frustrating is I have to accept the will of the voters, but even just the current moment of the absolute chaos that the American government is having in the world with no coherent, clearly communicated kind of new world order is really frustrating. And it's understandable, because that's how the United States works. We don't care about government because we don't need it, as we're an independent people. And so it's understandable, but you look at it from a little bit more perspective and it's important. So I don't have any insight on kind of these broader affairs. So I just hope that people smarter than me and more informed than me can make good decisions and that they would have wisdom. But I appreciate the question. It's super interesting and a hard one.
Thank you. And we don't have that many people smarter than you. So, we're looking at people like you to help us make a change. All right, man. Have a good one. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. It's very kind to say that, but we need, there's so many other sociological things that we could talk about, but even just on this space, we need experts. And sometimes I worry that in my youth, and hopefully I'm getting wiser, but I've joined in on kind of wanting to string up the experts from the nearest light pole. And yet when we need experts. And so we have to figure out how to reconnect experts with common culture so that we don't just try to throw out experts and then learn from them. And I'm just distinctly aware of how little expertise I have. So that's why I say that. Anyway, interesting question. And I love it for a Friday question. We'll see what, we'll see where we go. We'll see where we go in time. At the end of the day, we're all stuck in a corner of the world. And I do think, you didn't ask this, but I would say that I think there are a number of negatives and disconnects and downsides to kind of the hardcore internationalism. And it is probably only possible in a world of relative peace and a Pax Americana that we have lived in. And it does change in many places. So I'll save those comments for another time, but we'll go with that. All right. Fittingly, I will conclude today's Q&A show with a question that a listener called in. Hey, Joshua, I recently signed up on Patreon, but I'm not able to call in today for the live Q&A. I'd like to send in my question via email. And here's my question on language learning. I have a 5, almost 6-year-old boy who's just learning to read, a 3-year-old boy, and a baby. I would like to set a goal of incrementally teaching them Spanish. For context, I am probably intermediate in Spanish myself. I took 4 years in high school, but haven't really used it since. I've recently been re-listening to your podcast where you detailed your approach to teaching your children Spanish and French. My question is specifically for my oldest son. He is just learning to read, and I feel I need to get him started reading in English strongly before introducing Spanish. We've been big on reading aloud to our children their whole lives, so the boys have a capacity to sit a long while being read to. I'm capable of reading aloud to them in Spanish, but I'm curious how you recommend approaching or balancing reading in Spanish and or English, knowing I will also probably get resistance from the 5-year-old, and that he is at, in my mind, a delicate position of just starting to read English, and I want to get him hooked. My 3-year-old will sit and listen to anything. Also, another layer is that I have a new baby, 5 months. I'm a stay-at-home mom, so a lot of reading aloud has sadly been cut shorter than usual. My capacity is less right now. My husband is working long hours and isn't able to help until evening. It's been an adjustment going from 2 to 3, and I miss being able to read to them without interruption. I know it won't always be this way, and I'm excited for future learning opportunities. Thank you for your time. Well, I love the question, and one of the things I think that we all have to get used to is that life is disrupted, especially by children. Seems to me that every single time I get my family, like, everything's rolling smoothly, everyone's got their routine, and I can just sit back and kind of smirk a little bit about how smart I am and how great things are going. Then all of a sudden, new baby comes along and destroys everything for the next 9 months. Of a year. It takes a year to get back on track, and then finally I have a couple of months of life as ideal and everything's working, and then everything gets disrupted again. So I've just come to expect that as being a necessary thing at this point in time. There are a few comments or a few points that you made that would be kind of a few different questions that I will address. First of all, I think make it very clear that audiobooks are your friend. And so I would encourage you to embrace audiobooks and to embrace English audiobooks. I'm sure you already do that. Clearly, it's better to read with mommy because mommy is there in person, and that can deepen the relationship and it creates a shared experience. But if you're talking about things just from kind of an educational perspective, from a language perspective, audiobooks are wonderful, and I think that they should be used very, very extensively by all people. We're living in, it is a golden age, a new golden age, where audiobooks are so cheap, so available. Your local library probably has access to Overdrive or Hoopla or Libby or some other platform where you can get all the great English audiobooks for free included in your subscription. Audible, if you use an Audible membership, drops it to $11 a title. Basically, any book you can get for $11 or cheaper if you're buying things on sale. And then additionally, if you have an Audible membership, you get all kinds of classic books that are available there as well. And children can consume a huge quantity of reading, especially while they are learning to read with their eyes, they can consume a huge quantity of reading with their ears, and that is all positive and all good. And it is by far a better solution than watching vapid videos because of the quality of it. So at 3 is pretty young, right? But at 5, meaning 3 is pretty young to be engaged in an audiobook. But a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, that's a point in which you can give a pair of headphones, and the 5 or 6-year-old can stand and can sit and play with his toys while engaging with a book, can sit and draw pictures while engaging with a book, and you're getting a lot of really high level, very complex language, very high level vocabulary, super engaging plots, and that will solve kind of the problems that you have of, I need this child to be occupied so that I can get a rest at nap time. That'll solve it in a way that, vapid YouTube cartoons and things and YouTube shows don't solve it. So, and it's all to the good and no downside at all to using audiobooks. So I'm grateful that they're so easy to get and basically free at this point in time for good quality ones. Now, another point that you touched on is, well, is there some kind of confusion to introducing 2 languages, Spanish and English? So you said, I think he needs to get a good start on reading in English first before introducing Spanish. I would affirm that and say, yes, don't try to teach reading 2 languages simultaneously. Just teach English reading and wait until he's a very good, very engaged English reader before trying to introduce Spanish reading at all. And by reading, I mean reading with your eyes, reading the words on the page with your eyes, not listening to it. There is evidence in bilingualism studies that indicates that people who are bilingual often advance in the early years at a slower pace linguistically than those who are monolingual. But all of that is short-term and has no damaging long-term effects. And in fact, the long-term effects are the other way. So if you said, I don't want to introduce another language because it's going to confuse my child a little bit, or, he's going to not advance so well in his English skills because we're going to be a bilingual family, I think the data and the research that I have seen seems to be agreeing with that perspective, that there is likely, by being bilingual, there's likely a kind of a short-term underperformance in English because of factoring in the other language. But that's only a short-term, very early thing. And then all down the road, after this first year or two, while the child's kind of figuring out how to process the world in 2 languages, everything down the road is positive, and everything is superior from having access to 2 or more languages. Better brain health, better vocabulary, everything is better in the long term. So I think you should introduce it. I just don't think you should introduce it with your eyes until the child is reading comfortably in English. It should all be audio based. It should all be thinking and listening to it. So then back to its core problem, what I would say is all input is good input, meaning that there's nothing negative that can happen from adding Spanish input and bilingual input into your household environment if you are able to. You should moderate your expectations of what is actually going to be the positive result based upon how much time you're actually engaging in the practice. So if you are doing 10 minutes a day at the breakfast table, and that's all that you can do, and that's all that your children can handle, then you should do that. That's good input, and it's going to be a good thing. Don't expect that magically after a year of 10 minutes a day at the breakfast table, your children are just going to be totally fluent in Spanish and be totally thrilled. But the 10 minutes a day really counts. So think about an activity that you can do that works for you and your family, and then do that. And so it may be some word flashcards. It may be some bilingual reading. All exposure is good exposure. And then don't be scared to use other resources as well. So if you're going to put on a cartoon or a YouTube show or something like that, just put it in Spanish and have exposure to the Spanish language. And what I have learned is that will go a long way towards lessening resistance. What I've said in previous episodes of bilingual reading and great stories, all that I think is clearly the best way to do it. But by accustoming your children to listening in other languages, you can lower the resistance down the road. And so, my children, just one thing we do in our house, we very rarely ever watch a movie in English. We do watch movies most weekends, but we're almost never in English. And my wife frustrated sometimes. She's like, I don't want to watch this in another language. I was like, well, they don't know that it's an option anymore. And so I don't have any resistance to putting the movie in any foreign language. And their experience of watching movies is that it's going to be in a foreign language. Does it just magically pay off? No, but it just adds to, little by little, stone by stone, accumulates the ability and accumulates the ear and accumulates the accent little by little, just with it over time. And so, putting movies in Spanish and saying, hey, this is super exciting and we're going to have a movie that we wouldn't otherwise do, I think is a good strategy as well. So it's all, any input that you can do in any way, shape, or form is positive and good. And then your goal is, over time, when you're able to find activities that will stretch the child out. So what I would suggest is this. Here's one that works. Get a box of 1,000 Spanish flashcards and work on just some of those flashcards. Don't try to do them all grouped by subject area. That's super confusing. So don't try to do all the colors and all the different parts of the body together. Just pick some flashcards out and just start learning some words. Do some bilingual reading as you are able to, and then find a book that your children really enjoy, read through the book, and then have them do 15 or 20 minutes of listening to that book in another language. So I use Narnia for this. My children really enjoy Narnia. They've heard it in English. And so I will I have a child a little older than your oldest who is not particularly good at Spanish yet. And so I have him listen to the book in English. So he's fresh on that book. He really enjoys that. Of course, we're getting all the benefits of enjoying, that particular English novel. And then go ahead and listen to it in Spanish. And because it's a book that he knows and he just listened to, then he's much more sympathetic with it and able to keep going. If listening to a long period of time is a bad thing, then just go with a shorter amount, 15, 20 minutes. And just recognize that you're trying to get ultimately to 700 to 1,000 hours is ultimately we're going to get to. But in the beginning, it's okay if it's just a couple words here and a couple words there. Check into all kinds of resources that you could. So TalkBox Mom is pretty popular right now. If you're doing a homeschool environment, see if that would help you. Just try to put it in, and all exposure is good exposure. But it's better for you to have a happy home. It's better for you to get your rest time than to be stressing out about this. I guess that would be the last thing I would say is I think it's cool, those people who are able to, they have the resources and the ability and the desire, and they set up just this amazing multilingual environment for their children. Again, I think to that Canadian guy that I used to read his stuff, where he spoke Mandarin, his wife spoke Japanese to the children. They lived in Canada. The community language was English and French, and they had a Spanish nanny in the home. And his children grew up and are growing up fluent in all 5 languages at home. What an amazing gift for children. I also think it's just as good to start learning Spanish at 10 years old or at 15 years old and knock it out in a few years, that you're not that much behind. I didn't learn Spanish till high school. All worked out fine for me. You took 4 years of Spanish in high school. If you had continued on and you'd continued reading and you'd continued exposure and input and you'd studied abroad and whatnot, you'd be totally fluent in Spanish. So there's no reason why kind of the standard pathway of learning a language in high school can't work. So all exposure is good exposure. Do what you can do and recognize that if it doesn't get done this year, you can do it next year. And hopefully some of these tools and tips are helpful. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I enjoy doing these with you, although they were hard questions today. Not stuff I love talking about publicly, but tough questions. If you'd like to join me next week, go to patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance, patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance. I would love to invite you in to join me next week. Thank you.